Welcome to another deep dive. We're going to be spelunking the depths of the psyche today. You've asked to understand Carl Jung's concept of the shadow. And, well, we're going to use this video you shared as our guide. It's not just about psychology, though. It's about self-discovery and how facing our shadow can actually lead to a more fulfilling life.
It is a fascinating journey, isn't it? Jung provides us with a map, so to speak, to navigate this terrain of our unconscious. And, we can uncover hidden potential.
Okay, let's unpack this a little bit. The shadow. Where do we even begin? I mean, it sounds kind of ominous, right?
It can seem that way at first, but think of it this way. Have you ever noticed how you might have a strong, almost irrational reaction to someone? Maybe you feel inexplicably irritated by their confidence or dismissive of their opinions.
Oh, all the time. Like that person at work who's always bragging about their achievements. And I try to be happy for them, honestly. But honestly, it just rubs me the wrong way.
That feeling you're describing, that's a potential entry point into understanding the shadow. Jung believed that the shadow is formed by those parts of ourselves that we deem unacceptable, the qualities we reject, repress, or deny.
Okay, so in the case of my bragging coworker, could it be that I actually have a desire for recognition myself, but I've judged that desire as bad or selfish or something like that?
That's a great insight. And what's fascinating is that Jung didn't see the shadow as something inherently evil or bad. It's simply a part of our psyche that holds energy and potential, but it's been relegated to the darkness because it doesn't fit with our conscious self-image.
So instead of seeing it as like this monstrous thing, we should be looking at it as a source of information, almost like a hidden guide.
Exactly. And here's where the concept of projection comes in. Jung observed that we often project those rejected aspects of ourselves onto others. We see in them the qualities we've disowned in ourselves.
Okay, so back to my coworker. Instead of getting annoyed, maybe I should be asking myself, what is it about this person's behavior that's triggering? What part of myself am I not owning?
That is a powerful question to ask yourself. And this is where Jung's idea of individuation comes in. He believed that the path to wholeness involves integrating those shadow aspects, not eradicating them.
That makes sense. But how do we even know what our shadow looks like? It feels kind of like this abstract concept.
The video highlights some key indicators. Recurring dreams, for example, can be rich with shadow symbolism. Those unsettling feelings or anxieties that seem to pop up out of nowhere. Those could be whispers from the shadow.
And what happens if we ignore those?
Imagine trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can apply a lot of force, but eventually it's going to pop up, often in unexpected and forceful ways. That's what happens when we deny the shadow. It doesn't just disappear. It finds ways to express itself, often through projections, neuroses, or even physical ailments.
So in a way, working with the shadow is actually a form of preventative mental and emotional health.
Yes, absolutely. Instead of fearing the shadow, Jung encouraged us to approach it with curiosity and a willingness to dialogue.
So how do we actually have a dialogue with our shadow? Like, do we sit down with a cup of tea and imagine it across the table?
It might sound strange, but that's actually a technique some therapists recommend. Visualizing the shadow can make it feel less intimidating, more accessible.
I love that. But it's not just about visualization, right? The video mentioned journaling as a powerful tool, too.
Yeah, journaling can be a great way to start uncovering those hidden parts of yourself. The video suggested some thought-provoking prompts, like what scares me most about myself and what parts of myself have I disowned?
Those are some pretty deep questions. I can imagine it takes courage to actually sit down and answer those honestly.
It does. But, remember, this is an inner journey. And like any adventure, it has its challenges and its rewards.
It's interesting because when we talk about facing our fears, it's often in the context of external challenges, like climbing a mountain or giving a speech or asking someone out on a date. But this idea of facing our inner fears feels much more daunting way.
It can be, because it requires a willingness to be vulnerable with ourselves, to look at the parts we'd rather keep hidden. But as Jung believed, facing those shadows is what ultimately leads to wholeness and a more authentic life.
The video made a fascinating connection between the shadow and purpose. Could you unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. Think of it this way. What if those unfulfilled passions, the ones we've deemed too risky or impractical, are actually the shadow's way of, nudging us towards a more authentic expression of ourselves?
So it's not about suddenly embracing every dark thought or impulse we have, right? There's a discernment involved.
Absolutely. This isn't about, condoning harmful behavior. It's about understanding the underlying motivations, the unmet needs that might be driving those impulses.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we know which parts of the shadow to integrate and which to, keep in check?
That's where self-awareness and honest reflection come in. Remember, the shadow isn't inherently bad. It holds both destructive and creative potential. And it's up to us to become conscious of how it's operating in our lives and choose how you want to work with it.
I'm also curious about the connection between the shadow and creativity. The video touched on that briefly, but I'd love to hear you elaborate on it.
Sure. Jung believed that the shadow is a wellspring of creative energy. Think about artists like Frida Kahlo or musicians like Kurt Cobain. They weren't afraid to explore the darker aspects of the human experience in their work. In fact, their willingness to embrace those shadows is what made their art so powerful and relatable.
So for our listener who might be struggling with feelings of anger or frustration, could those emotions actually become a source of fuel for creative expression?
Absolutely. Imagine that pent-up anger channeled into, writing a powerful poem, composing a piece of protest music, or even becoming an advocate for a cause they care about. The shadow can be a catalyst for positive change, both personally and in the world.
That's a really empowering perspective, and it speaks to the idea that the shadow isn't something to be feared, but rather a force to be reckoned with, understood, and potentially harnessed for good.
Exactly. And as we do the work of integrating our own shadow, Jung suggests it has a ripple effect on the collective unconscious.
Now, that's a concept I'd love to explore further. You mentioned it briefly earlier, but could you explain what the collective unconscious and how it relates to the shadow?
Sure. Jung believed that beneath our individual unconscious minds, there's a deeper layer we all share, a kind of universal reservoir of human experiences, archetypes, and symbols. He called it the collective unconscious.
So it's like we're all connected on some deep subconscious level.
Exactly. Think of it as a vast interconnected web of energy and information that we all tap into. And when we do the work of healing our own shadow, Jung suggests it ripples out into that collective unconscious, contributing to the evolution of humanity as a whole.
Wow. That's a powerful thought. So it's not just about me and my own self-discovery. It's about contributing to something much larger.
It is. And it reminds us that while the shadow can be challenging to confront, it also holds immense potential for personal and collective transformation.
This idea of the collective unconscious also sheds light on why certain themes, myths, and archetypes appear across cultures and throughout history, right?
Yeah. Jung believed that these recurring motifs reflect universal patterns of human experience that are embedded in our collective unconscious. And the shadow, with its primal instincts and fears, plays a significant role in shaping those patterns.
I'm curious, how does this idea of working with the shadow translate into, practical everyday action?
Well, the video suggests that it starts with honesty, a willingness to see ourselves as we truly are, warts and all. But it goes beyond just, acknowledging our flaws. The next time a difficult emotion surges up, anger, jealousy, fear, don't run from it. Sit with it. Ask it what it wants you to know.
That sounds a little scary, to be honest, but also kind of exciting at the same time. It's like I'm being invited to explore a hidden room in my own house that I've always been a little afraid to open.
That's a great analogy. And just like exploring a new room can lead to unexpected discoveries, facing those uncomfortable emotions can reveal hidden truths about ourselves and unlock new potential.
So instead of pushing those emotions away, we're actually leaning into them. That feels so counterintuitive to how we're often taught to deal with difficult feelings.
It can be challenging because we're conditioned to, avoid discomfort. But the shadow thrives in those places we'd rather not go. The hidden corners of our psyche where we've buried our fears, our shame, our unfulfilled desires.
So practically speaking, what does it look like to lean into those uncomfortable emotions?
Mindfulness practices can be incredibly helpful. Instead of reacting impulsively when a difficult emotion arises, try to simply observe it without judgment. Notice the sensations in your body, the thoughts that are swirling in your mind.
So if I'm feeling a surge of anger, for example, instead of lashing out or trying to suppress it, I just sit with it and observe it.
Exactly. Ask yourself, what's triggering this anger? What need is not being met? You might be surprised by the insights that emerge.
It's almost like we're treating that emotion as a messenger, not an enemy.
Precisely. And remember, the shadow doesn't speak in clear, logical language. It often communicates through symbols, dreams, and strong emotional reactions.
That makes sense. So it's about paying attention to those subtle cues, those whispers from the unconscious. The video also mentioned that relationships can be a powerful mirror for reflecting our shadow back to us.
Absolutely. Think about those people who consistently push your butt, who trigger those strong reactions in you.
Yeah.
They're often reflecting aspects of yourself that you haven't fully acknowledged or integrated.
Yeah. It's almost like they're holding up a mirror, showing us those parts of ourselves that we'd rather not see.
Exactly. Instead of getting caught up in the drama of those relationships, try to step back and ask yourself, what is this conflict mirroring in me? What part of myself am I not owning?
So those annoying habits that drive me crazy in others might actually be clues to my own shadow.
It's the possibility. And here's the good news. As we become more aware of our shadow and start to integrate those disowned aspects of ourselves, those external conflicts often lessen or even resolve themselves.
It's like as we heal ourselves internally, our outer world starts to reflect that shift. That's pretty amazing.
It is. And the video reminds us that this is a journey, not a destination. There's no finish line when it comes to shadow work. It's an ongoing process of self-discovery and growth.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored what the shadow is, how to recognize it, and some practical ways to work with it. We've also touched on its connections to purpose, creativity, relationships, and even the collective unconscious.
It's been a fascinating exploration. And remember, the shadow, while often perceived as negative, also holds immense potential. It's a source of energy, creativity, and ultimately a path to wholeness.
So for you listening, we encourage you to continue this exploration. Pay attention to those whispers from your shadow. Be willing to sit with those uncomfortable emotions and listen to their messages. And remember, the journey of self-discovery is an adventure worth taking.
Beautifully said. And as the video reminds us, what is one shadow you're ready to meet? And what could it teach you about the person you're meant to become?
That's a question worth pondering. Perhaps even journal about it, as we discussed. And who knows what amazing discoveries await us on the other side of that shadow.